All right, Anil, so let's go ahead and get started then.
Okay.
And so Anil's going to be our host today, and he'll post the prayers, and we can get started with those first. Again, we've been reciting the Heart Sutra as part of this course, and I mentioned a little bit about the Heart Sutra last time, I think. Maybe not. I don't know. I'll be talking about a little bit today as well when we talk about the two truths, because there's that one wonderful phrase that we hear in this that's very famous of form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So we need to kind of give a little more background on that, which we'll do a little bit later today. But whatever understanding you feel you have of emptiness, try to bring that to mind as we recite this sutra together. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. Then we go on to do the short mandala offering, again, making this vast pure offering to the Buddhas, to our gurus, our teachers, so that we can receive their blessings, their inspiration, and actualize the realization of emptiness in our own minds, as well as all the realizations of the path, and eventually become enlightened. So let's recite this in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta before the teaching, which we'll recite once in English, twice in Tibetan, bringing to mind both of these thoughts of refuge in the 3 jewels, as well as the motivation of bodhicitta that we'll also meditate on shortly. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar sho. Okay, thank you, Anil. Go ahead and do a short meditation then. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit by using the breath as our meditation object. So again, feel free to use whatever technique you generally use with the breath, either focusing around the nose, the lower abdomen. Sometimes people are counting the breath, sometimes just the general sensation of the breathing in and breathing out, whatever works for you. And then making that your object, try to stay present with the breath as best as you can. And whenever the mind wanders away, when we see that that's happened, we let go of whatever distracted us. And without any judgment, we just simply return to the breath. So I will ring the bowl here from my side to get the meditation started. After a few minutes in silent meditation, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation of bodhicitta. So now let's set our motivation of bodhicitta. And to do this today, let's recall these two teachings that we've been working with in these last few classes. First, the idea of dependent arising, and this reasoning that helps us to find this perfect middle way, finding the way that things do actually exist, although they don't have any independent existence. They exist as dependent arisings, dependent upon their causes and conditions, dependent upon their parts, and in the very subtlest way, depending upon mere conceptuality, mere imputation, a conceptual consciousness identifying what things are. So things do still exist within the sphere of emptiness. We do find that things have some status of existing. And then in last week's class, we did the more detailed investigation into discerning emptiness, coming at it from that perspective of trying to deny anything more than that simple level of arising on the basis of conceptuality, anything that's more substantial than that, particularly the way that we hold to ourselves as being quite substantial and real. So on the one hand, we have the way things actually exist and arise. The other, we have the way that they lack any independent existence, any existence from their own side, on their own. And these two ideas are really central. We'll be examining this more today. But even when we set our motivation of bodhicitta, we can hold this awareness that while we are cultivating the conventional thoughts of thinking, I myself will benefit all sentient beings by becoming a Buddha, all of these things that we brought to mind are simply dependent arisings. There's nothing more real than that, merely imputed, merely designated, but existent nonetheless. And then together with that, we can bring our awareness of emptiness, that I myself lack any independent, inherent existence. Other sentient beings for whom I am working to help also lack any inherent existence. They don't exist on their own, independently from their own side. And even the goal of enlightenment, Buddhahood, that state that we are striving to achieve, it has no inherent existence. It doesn't exist from its own side by way of its own characteristics, merely imputed and empty. This is true for all phenomena. Their status in conventional terms being merely imputed, at an ultimate level being empty of inherent existence. And these two are completely complementary. So as we cultivate bodhicitta with those thoughts of being dedicated to helping all sentient beings by becoming enlightened, do it within the sphere of understanding these two truths that we'll be examining later today, that there is some valid perception of ourselves becoming a Buddha for the sake of others, but yet within that, the deeper awareness that all things, ourselves, others, enlightenment, everything, is empty of inherent existence. And this is actually how it all functions. If we didn't have emptiness, we could never become a Buddha. We could never achieve that goal. So just try to rest in this place for a moment of having that mind of bodhicitta, but seeing it from those two vantage points, simply dependent arising and lacking any inherent existence, empty. Okay, good. So thanks for joining today. And this is our second to last class. Next Saturday, I was mentioning at the beginning when we had just fewer people in the Zoom room here, but that I probably next Saturday, I'll cut it a little bit short, maybe teach just till about noon or maybe even earlier than that. So that way we'll just have a shorter class to sort of wrap up this module of discovering Buddhism. So let me go ahead and put on screen. Oh, I need to be enabled, Anil, for doing my share screen. So last week we talked about this technique for realizing the emptiness of the I in particular, that we can apply this to any phenomenon. It doesn't require that we have just the I as the object of this meditation. But nonetheless, it's very effective when we use it in terms of, thank you, Anil, in terms of discerning the emptiness of this person, this I that is in our continuum. So we have this 4-point analysis, and hopefully you had a chance to work with this over the last week with the meditation that was in the Dropbox. Identifying the object of negation is the first step. So if we're talking about the I, this is the sense of an I that seems to be setting itself up, that seems to have its own existence from its own side. It does exist, but it doesn't exist in this fictitious way. And we are holding this most of the time, that this object of negation is present in our minds because our ignorance is operative a good share of our time. So we could identify it if we knew how to identify it really easily. But what we have to do is bring to mind times, again, where it's been more prominent, when we feel like we're defending ourselves in the midst of being falsely accused or having some other really strong emotion. It becomes much more prominent then. And we sort of identify it as having that sense that it's actually there, that it has some reality to its side. So this is what we're trying to negate. So we need to bring that up, to conjure that up to some degree at a more clearer level, or else all the other steps don't really make much sense. We have to have an idea of what it is that we're trying to refute in order to actually do that refutation. If we don't have a good idea of that, then we may end up refuting something that is not enough. It doesn't really go far enough and doesn't really address this ignorance that is grasping at ourselves to inherently exist. If we make it kind of too vast, then we might actually negate the sense that there is a self at all. There is a self, there is you, there is, all of the phenomena in the world exist, but nonetheless, they don't have this greater status of existing inherently or from their own side. So again, we don't want to negate too much. We don't want to negate too little. We have to find that perfect object of negation. Then we determine the possibilities, determine what would be the likelihood that we would find it in any particular place, because if it does exist in this way, if it does set itself up, then we should be able to identify it and find it, go looking for it and actually seek out what it is that we are, what is the actual I, the real I, that sense of an inherently existent I. And the possibilities are the two that follow numbers 3 and 4. Either it is one with what we call the aggregates or the mind-body complex. Again, I think I've touched on the aggregates before, but essentially this is one schema that the Buddha used for talking about the basis for a being. The first aggregate is form, and that is our body. The last 4 are all in the nature of mind or awareness. And they include our feelings, which are the feeling tones that we have at any time in our mental experience, the discriminations that we make, indicating this is this, that is that. These 2 factors in the mind the Buddha highlighted because of their prominence in our creating difficulties for ourselves. And then the third one includes all of the other sort of mental factors or components of our mind. And then consciousness in general is the last one. Those 4 constitute mind, or that portion of our experience that is mental. Then we have, again, the body, form. So we have a mind-body complex. We need to see whether there's something within the mind-body complex that is one with that sense of an I, that is identifiable as being that I in all ways. Or the other possibility is we would find it to be completely apart from the mind-body complex. There's only 2 possibilities. This is what's called a dichotomy. And even we're going to see this word later when we talk about the 2 truths. But if this I does exist in this way that we conjured up in the first step, the possibilities are that it will either be one with the mind-body complex or the mind, the body, some part of all of that, or it will be completely different, completely apart from that. There's no third possibility. as I was saying last week, either Don is in the room or Don's not in the room. There's not a third possibility if Don exists. If Don doesn't exist, well, then he's could be in either place, right? But if there is a Don, if Don does exist, he's going to be in the room or he's going to be outside of the room. And outside of the room is a pretty big space, right? I could be in Timbuktu and be outside of the room. But nonetheless, these are the two possibilities. We cannot find a third one. And then we analyze for oneness. And as I went through last week, there's the technique of kind of going in and sort of looking and saying, okay, well, what is equivalent to this sense of a real I? Is it equivalent to my mind? Is it equivalent to my body? Is it equivalent to the collection of these? And then, of course, examining some of the consequences if this is the case. If we do find something that is that unitary I, that is a sort of unchanging I in all ways, well, then that's what it is. It can only be that. This is what we mean by an inherently existent I, is we find something that actually is that sets that up, that actually creates that, a true referent of that sense of I. And if we don't find it there, well, then we have to look in the last step of this, the second possibility. And to do that, we don't have to look in Timbuktu or all the other places to see if we can find this real I. All we need to do is mentally think about the mind and the body being set aside. And once we've set those aside, is some sort of, again, self-instituting I remaining there, something that is the I. And this would not be found in Buddhist terms because there is nothing that is locatable that is the I that is apart from the body and mind. And there's nothing within the body and mind. So having done that, we come to the conclusion. Those 4 steps lead us to a conclusion, a logical conclusion, that if we identified what we're looking for, we had identified the possibilities, we looked in the first possibility, we looked in the second possibility, and we didn't find it in either of those, then we didn't find it. It doesn't exist. We've negated the object of refutation. That sense of a inherently existent I is non-existent. So any comments or questions on that meditation? Were you able to work with it? And did you have any insights? Did anyone find the real I? Did you find your real I? I mean, we may have a sense still that there's something there that has to be the I, and that's understandable because this ignorance has been with us since beginningless time. And so we still keep feeling like there's something that is real there, that has to be real there. And recall that we also have that other problem that we looked at last week too, which was the idea that once we sort of label something, then there is an appearance coming back to us. It's not from the object, but it seems to be. It's a mistake that's happening in our minds due to these subtle imprints. It makes things appear as if they're real, makes them seem to be real. And of course, they aren't real. That false appearance needs to be negated as well. And that false appearance is very indicative of what it is we're trying to get rid of. And what we're trying to actually negate is the idea that things can set themselves up, that they do have their identity established from the side of this bowl. The identity of it being a bowl seems to be out here on the object. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with my mind. But we cannot find anything that is the bowl. I mean, you look at it, conventionally we can say, have you seen Don's bowl? Yeah, where it's right here. Well, that's one way of sort of analyzing and looking for things. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're getting into, again, what we use this big word, this ontological status. How do things actually exist? At a deeper level, how do we find them to exist? And we go looking for, there is a sense that there's a real bowl in my hand, that the boldness is established out here from its own side. And that's a false projection. And that is exactly what we're trying to negate. That is our object of refutation, is that something exists on its own out here from the side of this base. But when we go investigating into the base, where do we find the real bowl to be? Because there are many parts to this bowl. It seems like a unitary part, right? There's nothing kind of falling out. I can't break it in two or anything, not with my hands. So we think that it's a unitary whole, but it's got the rim, again, and you have many parts of the rim even, and then you have the inside, the well of the ball, you have the base of the ball, you have the sides of the ball, you have all these different parts of the ball. Well, which one is the ball? And you go, well, no, the whole thing is the ball. But a whole, again, is designated on parts. A whole is not equivalent to the parts. A whole is what we are labeling on the parts. You can bring in your awareness of dependent arising to kind of get back at, what are we really talking about here? What's in my hand is really the basis for bowl. Bowl is simply a designation we give to this. There's no real bowl in my hand. And bowl, the label bowl, and even the conceptual idea of a bowl, we give it a definition. I don't know what it would be, a round, flat-based object that's capable of holding cereal and milk or whatever, or in this case, this is a singing bowl, so it's capable of making a noise. So we have this other kind of definition of a bowl when we add on that idea of a singing bowl. But anyway, the idea is that all of that is coming from the side of our conceptuality, and that conceptuality and that idea of a bowl is not this bowl that is in my hand, or this basis for a bowl that's in my hand. This, what we merely are calling a bowl, is again, we're putting a label onto a base, and the label and the base are actually two separate phenomena. That's how we establish everything. We have a sense of I that we put on this collection of stuff. This collection of stuff is not equivalent to the I. The I is a label that we give to all of that. And then when we pick apart the parts of the I, we see that there's the body, and body is just a label we give to this collection of stuff that we call the body. This collection of stuff has a head and has a torso and has limbs and so on. All the various parts of the body, and any particular part of the body, as we went into previously, has its respective parts. I can say, okay, there's a hand. It seems to have its own handness from its own side. But that hand we can't find on any of the four fingers or the thumb. We don't find it on the palm or the back of the hand. Where is the handness? The handness doesn't exist on these parts. The hand is simply a label we give to this collection of parts. So again, this is how everything exists. And we're going to talk a bit more today about how we bring these kind of two ideas together of dependent arising and emptiness, and sort of understand them within a very coherent system of looking at things that Lama Tsongkhapa is renowned for having kind of devised in terms of his way of approaching what are called the two truths. Before that, we're going to go into a little bit more around this whole idea of how things are actually illusory, how they don't really have the reality that they appear to have. But any final questions or comments on what we did last week and kind of where we're at with this emptiness module? Everyone's still on board? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and go back to the slides. And I do want to share kind of the topics for today. I've been trying to put together a sort of summary slide. These are the things that I'm going to touch on today. The first is viewing yourself as like an illusion, which is actually the title heading for one of the chapters of His Holiness's book. Again, that I hope you've all been reading along with in terms of being able to have some additional sources for information. His Holiness has a much deeper understanding of emptiness than I do, so it's really worthwhile to read books by these great masters that examine emptiness. So this is chapter 19 in part 5, how persons and things actually exist. And so we're going to look at some passages from that chapter that get into some interesting points about how things are like an illusion, they're illusory. And then secondly, noticing how everything depends on thought, how in the end it is really just thought that is bringing things into existence. There's a basis, sure, we don't deny there's a basis, but that basis has no identity from its own side. We give it its identity through our thought processes. And then I want to touch a little bit on karma and emptiness, which isn't talked about quite as much in His Holiness's book. Neither are the two truths discussed so much, but these are very important topics to kind of bring into play in terms of our understanding of this wisdom of emptiness. So I will be going into those at the end of today's class. So I'm going to share a few passages that get at this idea of things being kind of illusory. To view yourself or other phenomena as like illusions. Remember, this is the way I always try to emphasize that it's like illusions. We're not saying that the world is an illusion or the world is a dream or the world is something completely fake. The world does have its own status in terms of mere imputation, as we saw through dependent arising. We're not utterly saying things don't exist at all. What we are trying to get at is that they don't have this substantial existence that they appear to have. In that way, they're like an illusion. They appear to exist in one way, but they actually exist in a different way, lacking inherent existence and existing as a mere dependent arising, depending upon thought, as we're going to get into in the second part of today's lecture. So this requires two things, His Holiness says. First, the false appearance of objects as inherently existent, which I emphasized last week, and I just emphasized it a short while ago in today's lecture, that things appear as if they're inherently existent. When I was holding up that bowl, it seems to have its own boldness, that singing boldness from its own side. Or even when we look at any object, that is how things appear to us. And that's through the force of our ignorance, having imprinted the mind over countless eons. We've had this since beginningless time. It has created these imprints that cause that appearance to arise, that cause things to appear as if they exist inherently, but they don't. So this is one of the tricky parts of working with this, is because we actually have this going against our reasoning, because everything seems to exist in this way. It seems to have its own status setting itself up, but it doesn't have that at all. So that's the first thing His Holiness says is required. And secondly, an understanding that you, or whatever you are considering, does not exist that way. So there's kind of two elements in this. This is going to be brought up by some of these examples that we're going to look at in this section that are kind of indicative of this idea. They use the word illusion. We don't, we have magicians, I guess, that do illusions. Most of us are more familiar with things like optical illusions, where you look at something and it appears to be one way, but it doesn't exist in the way that it appears in that dimension. But illusions, they say in the time of the Buddha in India and what have you, that they would have these sort of magicians that would do these tricks where they would cast a spell, use some sort of an ointment on the that would go on the eyes of the beings that were all in the room, and they would have like a stick and a rock. And the stick and the rock would be on the table, and then suddenly, through the force of this mantra and this substance or whatever, that would appear like there's a horse and an elephant in the room. And of course, in a room, if you've got a horse and an elephant, elephants can be actually very, very dangerous, and horses are also, if they're wild horses, can have, a lot of destruction that they can cause. So people would have all this fear because they think they're seeing horses and elephants in the room, but they're not. It's an illusion. There's a basis for it, which is the stick and the stone that are, cast through this spell to appear as if they have a deeper level of reality, as an elephant and a stick. I'm sorry, an elephant and a horse. But the stick and the stone don't exist in that way at all. This is all a false appearance. Well, this was the sort of illusory thing that the Buddha would be referring to when he talks about things being sort of illusory. But we do have that with modern magicians, right? I don't know I've seen, some of these people on TV or whatever doing their tricks where it makes it seem like the entire Brooklyn Bridge disappears or things like this, where they do something that causes people to have an appearance of what's not actually there. The bridge is still there, but they have the appearance as if there's no bridge there. Or if the old tricks of like sawing a person in half and then splitting it open, and the person wiggles their feet in one side and their head says something on the other side. And it seems like, oh my gosh, they've taken this person and split them into two, actually. These sorts of illusions have those two elements, right? Something appears to be something other than what it is, and we have the understanding that it's not existing in the way it appears. Because we can look at it and go, well, no, there's got to be something behind this. The person has to be kind of scrunched up on one side and somebody else on the other side, that is causing the feet to wiggle and the head to talk. You have to. There's something that's going on that is bringing the awareness that what appears is not the way it actually exists. So this is the idea behind an illusion. And actually, this is one thing we'll touch on next week in our final class about how we bring that awareness into our everyday life. But this is an important part of it, is to understand that the way everything is appearing to you, your computer, your lights, your cats, your dogs, whatever, every being, everything in the world, all appears as if it's real in the way that our ignorance adheres to, but it doesn't have that reality at all. And of course, this is, as I mentioned last week, part of the problem, because after we've imputed something, that identity seems to come back at us like it's fully established and always has been. Like it was just waiting around for us to identify what it already was. Well, that's the sense that we're trying to refute. But we can see things as illusory because we begin to understand that they don't have this. Through all these reasonings that we've approached, dependent arising and this 4-point analysis, we can begin to see that things don't exist in the way that they appear. Therefore, they are like illusions. They're illusory. They're like dreams, dreamlike. We never say that they are dreams, because your dreams are very different, right? Your dreams don't have the status that your reality does. Doing things in a dream, it doesn't mean that when you wake up, those things are done, that whatever it was that you did is real in the waking life. So those are the two elements of it. So then His Holiness goes on to say, because of your experience then in meditation of searching for and not finding this independent quality, although after meditation phenomena still appear to exist inherently, the power of your previous understanding opens the way for you to recognize that these phenomena are illusory, in that, although they appear to exist inherently, they do not. As Buddha said, all things have the attribute of falsity, of deceptiveness, because they are imbued with that through the force of this imprint on our own minds. It's not that they possess that and will always have that. This is a false appearance that we've created through our own adherence to that appearance is real, to our own ignorance that has grasped at that. So, through the power of our meditation, as I was saying, as you become more and more familiar with your reasoning of dependent arising, with your 4-point analysis, and there are other techniques that we can use to meditate on emptiness that we won't go into this course. I'm going through those on Wednesday night. But essentially, these techniques help us to arrive at that place where we understand the final nature of phenomena, and it's in opposition to how things appear. It is contrary to how things appear. So some examples of illusion that the Buddha does use, and I'll show it on screen in a minute. There's even a book called 12 Examples of Illusions that, what's his name? Jan Westerhoff wrote this book. It's kind of an interesting little book, but one of them is this idea of the magician's illusion that I mentioned, a number of those things from the time of the Buddha in India, as well as, the things that we can see as illusions that magicians conduct that make it look like something is going on different to what actually is happening. The reflection of a face in a mirror. You might think, well, that's not a big deal. I mean, I see my reflection all the time, and I don't believe that it's a real person in the mirror. But nonetheless, we do have experiences maybe occasionally in our lives where we see something that's reflected and we think for a moment, what is that? I think it's actually something real, but it isn't, because it's only the reflection. Reflections do exist and function as reflections, but they don't function as real faces or whatever is in the mirror. In the case of us looking at our face in the mirror, it's just a reflection of our face. It is not a real face. And again, I think we can get that one pretty easily. That's often an example of how even some things in our conventional awareness do have that mistaken appearance. The third is a mirage. And here in New Mexico, if you go driving, particularly like the southern part of the state or whatever, on a very hot summer day and the sun's beating down on the asphalt, and you can see up ahead on a very straight road, something that looks like water. And we know from very early experiences with mirages, whenever that first experience happened, or even just seeing mirages as something you became aware of on TV in a movie or what have you, that mirages don't exist as water. It's a play of the light that causes, that to appear as if it were flickering water on the surface of the asphalt, but there is no water there. Then a dream, we spoke about a dream earlier, I believe. When your dream objects appear, they appear to be real in the way that your waking objects appear. They seem to have that same status of reality. But within the conventional understanding of dreams, dream objects don't exist in the way that objects in our waking life exist. And they both have a false appearance when it comes to inherent existence, because everything has that falsity, as we just saw from that quote from His Holiness. But a dream object doesn't have the same status as a waking object. If we have a dream that there's an elephant in the room, well, then when we wake up, we don't see that elephant actually being there. So again, this is 4 of the examples that are used by the Buddha very frequently. And the one that I tend to like is a dream, because I think it's very easy for us, at least if your dreams are like mine. Do any of us really know what anyone else's dreams are like? I think we can make the assumption that we all share a similar experience when we're dreaming. But when I'm dreaming, I'm totally buying into everything that's appearing. I don't really have many moments of lucid dreaming. But if you bring in some lucid dreaming awareness, that's sort of like having this understanding that we're talking about, that we're creating with regard to this, bringing our reasoning and our analysis to play when we are examining things, looking at things in our everyday life. That when things appear, we have the understanding that they don't exist in the way they appear. So if you have a lucid dream, that's what's going on, right? All these dream objects are appearing, all these things coming from out of nowhere in the through your subconscious and whatever. It's all within your mental awareness. There's nothing happening with any of your senses, no sense objects being involved in all this. But all those appearances, as if they were real, as if all these various things were playing out. If you have an awareness of that in your dream, then that's exactly what's going on. They all appear to be real because they still have that appearance in your dream, right? Things come forward and they seem to be real. But if you have the understanding that they're not real, well, then you can begin to get this point that things are illusory, they're dreamlike, they're like a mirage, they're like, you know, any of these things. An echo is another one that's used. When there's the one amphitheater kind of thing that's up north of Abiquiu. I don't know if any of you have been up there where you can like scream into it and your voice comes back. Well, it's not really your real voice. It's not like a real person. It's the vibration of the molecules that you send out, and then they come back, and it sounds like there's another person there, but there's no other person there because it was your original, vocalization that kind of came back. Other examples. This is a little book. I don't know if you're interested in it. It's kind of nice. It's got some interesting pictures. It's called 12 Examples of Illusion. Again, his name is Jan Westerhoff. And let me look at what else is on his list here, because he's got some interesting things in here. The moon in water. This is one that is commonly used when we see like the full moon on a still lake. It looks like there's a moon in the lake, and you might even mistake it for a moment for the full moon. And then of course you go, oh no, the full moon's up there, but it's just a reflection. Then we have an optical illusion as in addition to a magical illusion. Rainbows are another common example. When we see a rainbow, it seems to be so solid, the colors in the sky and what have you, especially if it's a very vibrant one, if you've had a lot of rain that it's coming through to where you get that very vibrant color. Lightning, water bubbles, and so on. And most of the other ones I think I mentioned. There's one that's the city of Gandharvas, but anyway, I don't want to go into that one. That gets a little more complicated. But this is what His Holiness is speaking to in this chapter, is that we need to begin to incorporate this awareness that what is appearing to us, we can't trust that appearance. That appearance is together with a falsity, together with an idea that things are seeming to be established on their own, from their own side. So this makes it a bit slippery for people. I mean, when you begin to examine this and work with this, you kind of go, well, then what can I trust? Well, you can trust your own mind and your ability to rationally investigate and understand things. You know, and when we talk about karma and emptiness a little bit later, we can see how maybe that even lends itself to, well, then but what can I trust? Because I'm not really sure for, what is appearing is somewhat karmically indicated, so karmically flavored. But we'll get into that a little bit later today. But the point of this is not to make us totally freak out and think we can't trust anything in the world. There is still, again, a way that we can posit things as existing. Things do exist by virtue of those three levels of dependent arising, but they don't have this false existence that they appear to have on their own, established from their own side, existing, in that objective way. And this is, again, what we've been working with and trying to negate through all this. Let me go through a little bit more of what His Holiness says. It just kind of threw in that slide with a few of the more common ones that are set out. He goes on to say, seeing people and things as existing like illusions helps reduce unfavorable emotions because lust, hatred, and so forth stem from our superimposing qualities, good or bad, on phenomena beyond what they actually have. For instance, when we get very angry at someone, we have a strong sense of the wretchedness of that person. But later, when we calm down and look at that same person, we may find our earlier perception laughable. This is the whole purpose behind doing this is, well, there's obviously a great purpose in seeing things as illusory so that we stop grasping at them as inherently existent, because that's the root of our suffering. That's the root of that tree of samsara that I spoke to earlier. But nonetheless, it's also because all of our emotions, our lust, our hatred, our jealousy, our greed, everything is all rooted in ignorance. So if we undermine that ignorance, we see that then we can apply it to things and understand that there's no inherently existent evil in that person who's being challenging for us, who's causing, kind of triggering our anger to arise. There's no inherent anything within those things. We can begin to understand this at a very cursory level by even looking at the sensory objects that we do enjoy, that we do find pleasurable, versus those things that we find unenjoyable, that we don't want to partake of. And you could use food as an example, but you could use music. I tend to use music because I have a strong attachment to music. I freely admit it. I, love having music around, playing music and what have you. But, I have my style of music that I enjoy, right? And every one of you probably has a style of music that you enjoy, maybe a variety of them. People are pretty well versed in musical styles now, and some people might enjoy, you know, country music. Some people might enjoy pop. Some people might like jazz. Some people might like classical. And we have our favorite things that we enjoy that we really like. And we go, this is the most beautiful piece of music. I just love this type of music. And then you play it for someone else and they go, no, it's not really doing it for me. I don't really like that music. I like, and then they go off to talk about what they like. And you go, oh, no, I don't like that music at all. Well, who's right? Who is identifying the music correctly? If somebody else likes jazz and I like classical, and they think jazz is the best and classical is garbage, and I think classical is the best and jazz is garbage, well, who's correct? We're imputing those qualities on things, and those, as we're going to see a little bit later, are also somewhat karmically informed. There is no inherent greatness, beautifulness, uh, you know, top of the heapness to any particular bit of music. There's nothing inherent within those pieces of music that make them into the best music ever. It's our own imputing that on things. So all of these qualities, of course, the big problem with music or anything that we find pleasurable or that we find unpleasurable is that we have those polar kind of reactions. We get very attached to what is pleasant and we grasp at that and we think, oh, I've got to get more of that and I can't be separated from that and I have to keep having that. And then when something comes in that we don't like, we're like, oh, get it out of here. I don't really want to have that. I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to be a part of that. So we have these two forces of pulling things towards us, pushing things away. They're both rooted in this ignorance, first of all, that's grasping at the I, that's involved with all these things. But then we overlay on every object some inherent goodness or inherent badness. And then we have our attachment and desire on the basis of the goodness, and then we have our aversion and anger and what have you on the basis of the badness. But these are all projected by our own minds. There is no inherent goodness or badness to any particular thing. It's not to say, again, that some results don't arise that are more favorable than others for ourselves or other beings. I mean, we can still uphold, again, things having some ability to produce their respective effects, and that is part of our understanding of dependent arising. But it's not inherently good. It doesn't have anything from its own side that establishes it as what it is, as what it is experienced by us, at least. So this is the whole point of this, is that if we begin to see things as illusory, then when things come into your sphere of experience, you go to the store and somebody accosts you in the parking lot because they didn't like the way that you drove by them or something and didn't let them walk across first or something. They give you like all this kind of, you see it as illusory. You don't hold on to it so tightly because it's not real in the way that we think it's real. And then, of course, when we have the pleasant experiences in our life, we don't get that attachment mind and grasp at all of that and just not want to be separated from it and increase our desire because we see that it lacks any of those pleasant things. So there is a question in the box that says, could you please talk about the non-inherently existent I, the mere I, how to identify that, and how to relate to sacred objects that are merely imputed and empty as well. So the first one, in terms of the mere I mean, really understanding that there is simply this label. I, I think it's hard to get to that place initially because that's a hard level of reality for us to accept. Again, why? Because things appear to be real. We are grasping at them as real. When we get this idea that there's just a mere I, mere mala, mere bowl, mere whatever, that everything is just merely labeled. There's nothing from the side of the base that makes it what it is. I think it's hard for us to initially get kind of our heads around that. But if we keep working with it, and that reasoning of dependent arising is very useful to kind of get to that place where we understand that there is nothing from the side of the base that makes it what it is. It's purely a conventional label that we give to things. There is conventional agreement. We all agree that we can think of this as I. I wouldn't think of this as I, right? Oh, here I am. Do you want to see Don? Well, here's Don. This isn't what we would adhere to as an I, because we all conventionally agree to that. But there's, again, no I from the side of this collection of stuff. So the I is simply a label, merely a designation, merely a thought I have in relation to all of this. Again, I don't know that I can give too many clues about doing all of it. I think it's just repetition. With so many of these ideas around emptiness, it's just a matter of getting exposed to them again and again and again, and trying to hold that awareness again and again and again. And then we actually have it begin to manifest for us. We begin to see it a little bit more clearly. We begin to feel that a little bit more. Because the idea behind it, because we really have to go back down to, that very initial lecture that I gave where we talked about the tree of samsara. If the ignorance is the roots from which the whole thing is happening, well, then when we combat that ignorance with something like the reasoning of dependent arising, when we come to the conclusion that the I is merely imputed, it should begin to undermine that process. We don't have these other states of mind arising together with that ignorance, because that ignorance isn't present. And so then we don't have any of our, outrageous reactions to things, our attachment, our anger, and so on. We don't have all the karma that we're creating. All of that doesn't happen if we are simply in the space of acknowledging that we're merely imputed. So we have to get to that point, and I think it's very hard to get to the point where, because I am merely imputed, because there is nothing more than a conceptual designation to this collection of stuff, there's no room for any of that to arise. But there still is an I, albeit merely imputed, that becomes enlightened, that practices the path, and so on. So we can kind of uphold conventional existence within the sphere of understanding the ultimate nature, the emptiness of inherent existence. So getting to that place where we really have a clear view of that mere I would even propose, and I don't know if this would be agreed upon by all teachers that I've had, but I would propose that you probably don't have a real true understanding of that, one that kind of hits home all the time, until you've realized emptiness directly. And that doesn't happen for quite some time, right? On our path, that actually has to be cultivated together with concentration, which I emphasize at the beginning of the course, right? You have to be able to bring that mind of concentration together with this mind of wisdom, what's called calm abiding and special insight. When we unite those minds, then we can achieve over time, when we continue to examine emptiness, what's called a direct realization of emptiness, which is the goal. To some degree, it's not the final goal, but it's the goal of our cultivating our wisdom of emptiness, is to get it to that place where it's no longer a thought we're having about things. It becomes something that we actually experience. We know emptiness in a non-dual manner, where it's not an object that the mind is knowing and the subjective awareness knowing it. These kind of merge into one. We have this experience. Again, I haven't had this experience, so don't look at me. But this experience happens further down the path, where we have that sort of melding of the mind, where there's no longer a subjective awareness knowing an object. These two kind of become one. And by virtue of knowing emptiness at that very deep level, you come out of your meditation with a very different understanding of things. Everything appears to you as if it's real still, because that fault is still there until you become a Buddha. It's still going to be in the mind, either it'll be manifest whenever we're not realizing emptiness, and it'll be in a kind of non-manifest way whenever we're realizing emptiness directly. But nonetheless, when you get up off your cushion, everything appears to be real, but you have no belief in that. You're seeing it as merely imputed. You're understanding its emptiness. You know that things lack any of that way of appearing. So I would propose that, even, to your question, Aida, that, we really don't know what this mere I is completely like until we come full circle, and having realized the emptiness of the I, the lack of inherent existence of the I, we then can get the very subtle way that the I exists, as merely imputed, merely designated. All of what appears is that way. It doesn't have any of that concrete appearance that it seems to have. And then the second point of it, how to relate to sacred objects that are merely imputed and empty as well. Well, it's the same reality. The Buddha is empty of inherent existence. Our holy objects on our altars are empty of inherent existence. Does it mean they don't have any qualities of holiness, if you will, or sacredness? No, because those are also imputed, but they are imputed on a proper basis. If I went around and said, oh, this is a um, well, let me use the cushion that I have under my bowl. This is a holy cushion. This is a cushion that da 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 da. Well, I mean, maybe over time it might start being instilled with that sort of thing, but this is how things come to be sacred or come to have that quality, is because people impute those qualities on them, and they can exist from that point of view. Nonetheless, there also are the beings who have developed their minds to that degree, who have those qualities at a deeper level, albeit them merely imputed, but they also are a support for that. So you have kind of like two tracks. You still have the imputing consciousnesses that are giving these things particular qualities, that are holding our, holy objects as more important, putting our Dharma books on our higher shelf or whatever, all these various things we're doing. That's coming from our side, but from the side of the object, certainly these are the words, these are encapsulating the understanding of an enlightened being, which is very different than my understanding of Dharma and what have you. I mean, when I look at things, this question does come up frequently about, well, if everything's merely imputed, how do sacred objects have any more qualities than anything else? Why would a statue of a Buddha have something more to it than a statue of Einstein? Well, Einstein and the Buddha are different. There's a different being that is being encapsulated in that image. But the one thing that I point out as an example is, let's say you had two pieces of metal. You have one that is just an ordinary piece of metal, the other that is magnetized. Do you say that because both of those pieces of metal lack inherent existence, that shouldn't have any magnetic quality to it? That they should both be kind of the same in terms of them lacking all qualities on the basis of that? Its magnetism is a quality that is there due to causes and conditions that led it to have that. The sacredness of a Buddha image is there because of all of the causes and conditions that led that to be a sacred image. So I don't think it is totally outside of the sphere of understanding. Things can still arise within the sphere of emptiness, having different qualities. Just like a Buddha has different qualities than an ordinary being like myself. And those are based on the causes and conditions that a Buddha had created to create that result, versus me at the level of causes and conditions I've created to continue to be in an unenlightened state. So I don't know if that helps, but that's the way I always talk about it, is in terms of just like two pieces of metal, one that's got magnetic qualities. You wouldn't say that it doesn't somehow that those qualities can't be upheld within everything being empty of inherent existence, because it should be just like the non-magnetized piece of metal. Rather, there are causes and conditions that led it to have those qualities. And it's the same with our sacred objects. But do recognize there's kind of two sides to it. That's the track of sort of what is the causes and conditions for that basis that becomes that image or whatever. And then we have our mere imputation of that, our designation of that, which of course we're all involved in creating sort of these objects as sacred, as having a very special place in our own spiritual practice. And then Victor asked regarding dreams. I had experienced similar dream with loved ones happening simultaneously to the both of us. In the dream, there's a strong sense of vulnerability. How do I interpret this experience? Oh, Victor, I'm sorry, I don't know that I can interpret it. That's again, dreams are interesting states, right? We do work out a lot of stuff in our dreams. It seems it's why a lot of psychologists and Jungian analysis and what have you, they often work with dreams, because there's some rich stuff that's going on there that is pointing to the underworkings of our mind and what have you. So it's very hard for me to say I don't. I've never done sort of dream analysis or anything, but the sense of vulnerability, I think that's something that, again, is indicative of what can happen to all of us. This is part of it. Even when we get into the teachings on emptiness and working with emptiness, we can start feeling some vulnerability, because the strong grasping at the sense of self that is there, when we start seeing that it doesn't exist in that way, we can feel very vulnerable, or sort of even, whoa, how can I sort of hold on to what it is that I'm so much more comfortable with, which is that sense of I that I have been with since beginningless time, and to kind of go out. I don't know if I use this analogy. I don't think I use it in this course, because we didn't really touch on all these other what are called philosophical tenets. But the Buddha taught over 45 years, and so he didn't teach this exact view of emptiness every time he talked about selflessness or emptiness. He taught coarser forms of this to other beings who weren't really ready for the depth of this teaching. This is the most profound teaching the Buddha gave. I'm letting letting you in on that secret. This is the most profound teaching that the Buddha gave in his entire career, 45 years of, giving the Dharma. But he didn't teach this way to everyone, because not everybody's ready for that. And so there is this idea that what he's encouraging us to to examine and let go of, this idea of an inherently existent I, or this is the hardest thing for us to let go of. And the teaching assistant over in Italy, he said that the example that works for him is, say you're wading. I don't know why I had a hard time getting that word out. Wading into a lake, and the lake, of course, at the shore is very shallow, and it becomes deeper and deeper the closer you go to the center of the lake. He said that this sense of an inherently existent I is like the life preserver that you want to hang on to until the very end. Like, you don't, it may not be as necessary when you're just examining, kind of going in a little bit, and that doesn't challenge quite as much these coarser views that the Buddha taught, which I haven't had time to go into as part of this course, because it's really kind of beyond what we need to know at this point. But these coarser views of what we're trying to refute, you start wading in and letting those go, but you keep holding on to your life preserver. You keep holding on to the sense of an inherently existent I, and inherently existent everything. It's the last thing you have to let go of. And it feels vulnerable to do that, right? Because you're in the deep water. You don't know what's going to happen when you let go of that. So I don't know, maybe that was just a little digression in terms of your using vulnerability in your question, Victor, but vulnerability sometimes can be indicative of how we are actually touching on something that's really useful for us to explore and see, is this really, something I have to hold on to, something I have to continue to have some awareness of. But yeah, I'm not so sure in terms of dreams that I have a good ability to dissect them and talk about them. Dream states, again, I wouldn't be too obsessed with kind of figuring them all out, because they are part of our sort of subconscious working things out. But nonetheless, there might be some things, some bits that we can take from our dream that we can work with and say, well, maybe that is a doorway for me to explore some other things that are going on with my spiritual practice or with my life and what have you. But I don't know if I can say much more, really, but let's take a little break. I already have us at 11:36 or something like that. It just turned 11:37. So let's say at 11:47 we'll resume. And I'll go into a bit more of the material, because I do have a number of things I want to try to cover today. And then we'll see if there are any further questions after that. All right, so about 10 minutes. I'll see you then. Okay. So let's go through a little bit more of what His Holiness says in regard to this idea of seeing things as being illusory. The next slide says the benefit of insight, developing this insight into emptiness and the illusory nature of things, is that it prevents us from attributing to objects a goodness or badness beyond what is actually there. Now, it's interesting. You just, heard me say a few minutes ago that there's nothing from the side of the object, right? There is no goodness or badness inherent within jazz or classical music or pop music or whatever, right? Well, when he says what is actually there, he doesn't mean what is there in an inherent way. He means what is there in terms of our karmic experience of that particular object. Why do we have a predisposition that ripens into our seeing a particular music or a particular food as enjoyable, delightful, whatever? That is a karmic happening. That is due to, seeds that are planted within our own minds that cause that type of a relationship with that. So again, this is not saying that things are actually there from the point of view of them existing inherently. What it means by actually there is in terms of what our actual experience of that object is, which again is going to be very different for each particular person. Some things arise as pleasant for some people, some as unpleasant for other people, and so on. I'm going to put this on pause for just a moment. Sorry. There's the water. Oh, he's getting it. Okay. Patrick had the water on for boiling, and you could hear it in the background perhaps. But anyway, I was going to have to go get it off the water myself, or off the heat. Okay. So then he says, this undermining of self-deception makes it possible to reduce and eventually end, lust or desire and so on, and hatred, since these emotions are built on exaggerations. This is something we looked at back in Module 9 of Discovering Buddhism, no doubt. I don't know that I taught 9 to all of you, but anyway, this is the idea behind how the delusions are working. Why they're called delusions, these afflictive emotions, is because they are deluded in terms of imbuing things with an exaggerated sense of attractiveness if they're objects of our attachment, or exaggerated senses of unattractiveness if they're objects of our anger, aversion, what have you. So this exaggeration is what's going on. We have, again, an actual experience of something being pleasant for us. Without a doubt, we come into contact with certain objects that produce that pleasant sensation, that pleasant feeling. And then we have some that we come into contact with that produce an unpleasant feeling. But everything on top of that is an exaggeration in terms of thinking that painting it all as bad or all as good. And this is what we're talking about here, is when we begin to see that there's nothing inherently there, that it is appearing to exist in this more concretized way as being completely evil or completely good, then we loosen up somewhat and we don't get so caught up in things. His Holiness goes on then to say, the elimination of unhealthy emotions in turn leaves more room for healthy emotions and virtues to develop. By viewing phenomena with insight, you actually bring them within the scope of the practice of emptiness, and therefore you counteract what is the more negative tendencies from occurring, and you create the space for more positive emotions. So that, for example, when that person is accosting you in the parking lot or whatever, you won't see them as inherently evil and awful, but you may even be able to, in the place of that, cultivate compassion for them, because there's plenty of room within wisdom for all these positive qualities to develop. This is what's one of the most amazing things about the mind, is that when we come to realize emptiness, it's not like that wisdom of emptiness negates both positive and negative states of mind. It only eliminates negative states of mind, because those are what have to be rooted in ignorance. When we get rid of that ignorance, those negative states have no ground from which to arise. The positive states can still be there. They are complementary to our wisdom. Again, they are conventional minds. They do have a conventional nature, but they can be developed within the sphere of the wisdom of emptiness. Whereas all of our negative states, there's no room for them to grow once we have eliminated ignorance, once we have at least toned it down so that it's not so operative in our lives. So he goes on to talk a little bit about these positive emotions, and maybe I'll talk about these a little bit more next week as well. But it says, when you practice expanding your love and compassion, keep in mind that love and compassion themselves and the persons who are their objects are also like a magician's illusion, in that they appear to exist solidly in and of themselves, but do not. If you see them as inherently existent, this view will keep you from fully developing love and compassion. I mean, your love and compassion is a positive quality. Don't deny it from happening, but recognize that when you unite it with that wisdom that sees even the objects of our love and compassion as illusory, as lacking inherent existence, then we are able to bring these two states of mind together, wisdom and compassion. which, as many of you know, are said to be kind of the main elements of our path to enlightenment. Venerable Rabbeinu often uses this example, which comes from the Buddhist scriptures, of a bird that in order to fly the full distance to the destination requires both wings. If you only have one wing, a bird doesn't go off the ground even, right? You can't fly with just one wing. But if we have both wings and they're both fully developed, then we can get to the goal of enlightenment, our destination. The one wing is the wing of wisdom that we are talking about in this module, that we're trying to fully develop so that we can undermine the ignorance that is holding us back from achieving that goal. But the other wing is the wing of compassion, that is complementary to wisdom, that actually is the sort of force, the energy behind which we will actually achieve our greatest results of complete enlightenment. This is sort of what they often call this the method side of the path, whereas this is the wisdom side. And both of those have to be fully developed, but they're completely complementary. Again, when we practice the wisdom of emptiness and we come to understand things as illusory, we can hold that compassionate thought within that understanding, similar to what I was encouraging you to do in the meditation today, right? When we did our meditation, setting our motivation, bodhicitta is meant to be cultivated within both of those wings. It is certainly rooted in our compassion and that method side, because it's all about driving us to achieve this goal for the benefit of all beings. But it is completely upheld within the wisdom of emptiness, and the wisdom of emptiness is central to achieving that. So when we begin to understand beings as being illusory and so on, and this is the last part of His Holiness's book that we'll get into next week, the chapter that's essentially called, well, the part is called Deepening Love with Insight. And it's all about these analogies that are used by Chandrakirti that are useful for us to apply to our compassionate thoughts, our thoughts of bodhicitta and so on, so that we unite both of those minds. We take the insight of wisdom that we get and the love and compassion that we're generating and make them into one mind if we can. So this is what His Holiness is saying here, is when you don't have this ignorance present, when you're at least able to see things as somewhat illusory, not so concrete and solid, existing from their own side, then you can begin to have space. You get rid of the negative emotions and you have space for generating some love, some compassion, some concern. And you can do that while still adhering to that illusory idea, not adhering to the inherent existence that appears to you. This is how we actually change our minds, is by bringing both of those into our practice of the path. So he says, instead, view them as like illusions, existing one way, but appearing another. This perspective will deepen both your insight into emptiness and the healthy emotions of love and compassion, so that within such understanding, you can engage in effective compassionate activity. By effective, he means ones that compassionate activity that will actually get you to the full goal of enlightenment. You can do lots of compassionate things in the world, and many people do, without having any understanding of emptiness or the illusory nature of things. But if you can bring that to bear, then you're going to actually make great progress in your path to enlightenment. So that was that first topic. The second topic, noticing how everything depends on thought. This is where I'm going to do a similar thing in going through a few of these passages of His Holiness. But one of the main things that is introduced in this chapter, which I find to be one of the most powerful ways to approach this topic of emptiness, and His Holiness kind of agrees, or I can say I agree with him, because he's putting it forward as, from his own experience, which is much more profound than mine, is this idea of the rope snake analogy or example. And so I'm just going to turn open to these pages 186 to 187 and maybe read a bit of this here, because some of you have come across this before. But the idea behind this is, again, is that we're trying to get at how everything depends upon thought, how in the end there's nothing from the side of the basis that dictates what things are, that gives them their own identity, that it's purely coming from our conceptual mind, our designating things. Again, this is the subtlest form of dependent arising. We're not denying that there are causes and conditions involved, or that there are parts involved, but conceptual designation is the subtlest way that all of those are operative within. Why you can talk to causes and conditions is because things are merely imputed, because we merely impute a cause to to one part of it, and the effect or the result to the other, and then that effect becomes a cause for its own effect, and so on. His Holiness goes into this in this chapter a bit in terms of how things can have that dependence upon designation, upon, like we designate this in relation to that, a sort of relational or mutual agreement that's going on. So we identify a father in relation to the father that they have children that would be making them a father, but they could be designated as son in relation to their own parents, right? And so we have relational things that can be established in our world. These are also indicating that things depend upon designation, imputation, nothing more than that. So His Holiness speaks on page 186. He says, when I was about 35 years old, I was reflecting on the meaning of a passage by Lama Tsongkhapa. Again, we just commemorated his passing into nirvana 2 days ago on Thursday with Lama Tsongkhapa Day. 601 years. It was 600 years last year. Had a kind of a big celebration back when we were in the Gompa and what have you on 2nd Street. But he was contemplating the meaning of a passage by Tsongkhapa about how the I cannot be found either within or separate from the mind-body complex. Sound familiar? We did that analysis last week. And how the I depends for its existence on conceptuality. Again, kind of bringing those two ideas together. The I can't be found in an inherent way on this basis, this mind-body complex, and it exists through mere conceptuality, mere designation. That real I doesn't exist, but how I does exist as this merely imputed I. So here's the passage, and I'll read the passage and maybe share a little bit about what His Holiness says after. He says, a coiled rope's speckled color and coiled form are similar to those of a snake. And when the rope is perceived in a dim area, the thought arises, there's a snake. As for the rope, at that time when it is seen to be a snake, the collection and parts of the rope are not even in the slightest way a snake. Let me actually share my little slide here. I found 2 little images that I don't know if it's a perfect image by any means to demonstrate this, but hopefully neither one of those scared you because it's just an image. My little brother was so funny when he was growing up. I was a bad big brother. He was afraid of the pictures of the snakes in our World Book Encyclopedia. And I would actually drag his fingers towards the pictures to show him that there was nothing to be afraid of. But he would scream so loud. I feel bad for having done that to my brother. Maybe I was trying to teach him emptiness from an early age, but I don't think so. I think I was just a bad brother. But anyway, so keep in mind these 2 things, this idea of, again, a coiled rope that's on the left there. As for the rope, he says, at the time when it is seen to be a snake, so imagine that in a dim corner of a room or something, and you kind of go, oh my gosh, there's a snake in the corner there. The collection and the parts of the rope are not even in the slightest way a snake. Therefore, that snake is merely set up by conceptuality, right? It's just our thinking there's a snake on the basis of that coiled rope in a dim room, a dim corner, or what have you. So, in the same way, when the thought I arises in dependence upon mind and body, nothing within mind and body, neither the collection that is a continuum of earlier and later moments, nor the collection of the parts at any one time, nor the separate parts, nor the continuum of any of the separate parts, none of these is in even the slightest way the I, equivalent to that strong sense of an I. Also, there is not even the slightest something that is a different entity from mind and body that is apprehendable as the I. Consequently, the I is merely set up by conceptuality in dependence upon mind and body. It is not established by way of its own entity. So when we use this example, His Holiness says that this was it was as if lightning moved through his chest. That time he was recalling when he was 35. And this really helped him to recognize the illusory nature of things and to see that things are merely set up by thought. But let's go into some of the explanations that get into this a little bit deeper from a book that I don't know if it's on your book list or not. It's called Introduction to Emptiness, as it's taught in Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path. So there's a bit of a misnomer to that. It's not just like an introduction to emptiness for anybody, but it's a pretty profound view of this topic that's taught in Tsongkhapa's text. But nonetheless, Guy Newland does make things very approachable. So here's how he describes it. Here's the example that Tsongkhapa uses. In the twilight, someone sees a rope and mistakes it for a snake. suppose we leave aside anything we might know about the perspective of the person who sees the snake. I mean, let's not talk about it from that side. Instead, we ask about what the snake is like on its own terms. This is absurd, he says. We cannot begin to discuss the features of the snake. Why? Because in fact, there is no actual snake there at all, right? It's just a coiled rope, as I had in that previous slide, right? So if we were to say, let's talk about the features of a snake there on the left-hand side, you'd be like, what are you talking about? There's no real snake there. Okay, so now that's the sort of the setup for it. Analogously, suppose we leave aside any consideration of how people and cars and tables appear to ordinary valid conventional consciousnesses and ask, how do these things exist from their own side? What are they like in and of themselves? There is nothing that is purely objective, nothing out there completely apart from mind that we can pin down and point out. It has no objective existence. Just as with that, coiled rope, there's no snake on that coiled rope. There also is no I on the collection of mind and body. And you might think, well, but there's a big error with this coiled rope, right? Because we think it's a snake, but it's not a real snake. Well, we're going to get to that. But unlike the hallucinated snake, Guy Newland says, these people in cars do exist. So unlike that rope that we see as a snake that we think is a snake, but it's not a real snake in our, conventional language. These people, all the people we see, cars, ourselves, they do not exist at all on their own, but they do exist. Unlike the rope snake, we never find a real rope snake, but nonetheless, cars and people do exist, but they also do not exist at all on their own. Next sentence, however, they do not present their lack of independent existence to our senses. Instead, they appear as though they were established on their own out there. This is also that false appearance that's being spoken to earlier, right? So, the delusion that is the root of psychic existence, what is the root of our tree that we spoke of a few classes ago at the beginning, involves seeing things, particularly ourselves, as having just this sort of objective and autonomous being. This delusion sees things as being set up from their own side, as having their own natural way to be there. So Kappa says that this ignorant mind apprehends each phenomenon as having a manner of being, such that it can be understood in and of itself without being posited through the force of a conventional consciousness, here meaning a conceptual mind that designates it, that thinks of it, that imputes it. So this is what we're talking about, what we're trying to remove. And I realize we did speak to this earlier, but it's always useful to hear this through other people's language, right? This is the way Guy Newland refers to this, So this is what we're trying to combat by seeing that just as we think there's an I on the basis of this collection of stuff, that is as false as thinking there is a snake on the basis of a coiled rope in a dim area. We usually suppose, though, that the world is already and always was fully real, independent of our minds, out there, waiting to be revealed by the searchlight of consciousness. This is what I was speaking to earlier, right? It seems as if things already have their identity on their own. And it's just waiting for us to say what it is. It's got its own bookness that exists on the side of that basis that is just a matter of us identifying it as book, agreeing with how it is appearing or what have you. In fact, our minds are actually collaborating in the creation of the world moment by moment, and actually the main agent in creating the world. Collaborating is a little loose in my perception, because there is a basis. We're not denying there's a basis, but our minds are the main creators of that. We create our world. We organize our world through the force of our conceptual awareness, our designating mind. So then he goes on to address this whole idea of, hallucinated snakes and what have you. He says, this does not mean that hallucinated snakes have the same status as people and cars and tables. Snakes falsely imputed to be ropes do not, in fact, exist, while tables and people do exist because they have a valid conventional existence. This is a vitally important distinction. So we're not going to say that any old consciousness can make up any old thing on basis of whatever. There has to be some conventional agreement to what does exist and what doesn't exist. And we can say people, tables, books, what have you. They all have a valid conventional existence. They are known through valid imputation, imputing the proper label to the proper basis. But when we impute snake to a coiled rope, this is not the same status, right? Because it doesn't have that validity. Nobody would say, oh yes, you do have a snake there, even when the light is turned up and the area is no longer dim, and you can see what's in the corner of your room. So he uses another example here. He brings a rainbow into play. We talked about rainbows earlier as an example of the illusory nature of things. Here it's the idea of, the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, right? Which this old myth that I don't know if it comes out of Ireland. There seems to be a lot of leprechauns looking for this, right? Suppose I very much want gold. I may see a rainbow and, affected by my desire for gold, think, over there I will find a pot of gold. This is rather in the nature of seeing a rope and out of fear believing it is a snake. Of course, it's the opposite because it's something we desire, not something we would fear or have an aversion towards. But he goes, there is no snake, there is no gold in those places at all. But there is a rope and there is a rainbow. These things exist conventionally. We can appropriately impute them, saying, there it is, there's the rope, there's the rainbow, they function. They function just fine as what we are designating them as. There's still some functioning, but they don't function as the, what brings us a pot of gold, the gold at the end of the rainbow, and they don't exist as a snake because they're not the proper basis for that. Again, they do exist conventionally as a rope and a rainbow, but other than that, we can't find, any of these false conceptions in regard to them. So, he says, we can recognize that this idea that things depend upon minds does not destroy conventional existence. There is still the rope. It doesn't utterly get rid of the rope, and there still is the I. It doesn't get rid of the I in its entirety when we do this analysis. At the same time, it is definitely not just another way of talking about what we already know. It does not leave our usual sense of the world unscathed. It should deeply impact what you view in terms of the world because you come to understand the deeper nature in which all things exist. To take the snake example, going back to that, Guy Newland goes on to say, when a person sees a rope and imagines a snake, there is no snake at all in the rope. But, and this is the crux of all of it that you probably have gleaned already, but this is one of the most important statements in this. But even when there actually is a snake and we perceive a snake, the snake as we perceive it is also completely absent. Of course, he had it in italics. I have the main part in italics, so I put it in non-italics. Read that again. Even when there actually is a snake in our conventional parlance, right? When we put that back on the screen, right? Even when, when there is that right-hand side, right? Even when there is a snake, I can read it from the book here. I'm going to go to the book and read this part of it. Sorry, I have to get back to that part of the book here. So, to take the snake example, when a person sees a rope and imagines a snake, there's no snake at all on the rope. That's the left-hand side. But even when there actually is a snake and we perceive a snake, the snake as we perceive it is also completely absent. It is just as non-existent as the rope snake. And Guy Newland goes on to say, this is profound and important to reflect upon. So now I'm going to read the rest of what he says here while I keep the images up there. So keep focused on this idea that from the right-hand side, even though this is just a little computer image, it's not, anything that's threatening you. It's not a viper that's actually going to bite you and put poison into your system or anything. But see how that seems to have snakeness from its own side. In this case, we're trying to negate again that has any snakeness at all, not even an atom of snakeness from the side of that basis. So this is what Guy Newland goes on to say. As we perceive it, the snake is inherently existent. It appears to our minds as something objectively real, existing in and of itself. Such a snake does not at all exist right now, and it never could exist. Thus, when we feel that Tsongkhapa's emphatic validation of conventional reality is pulling us too far in the direction of affirming the ordinary way that things appear, we can recall snakes and ropes are equally devoid of the kind of snakes I perceive, believe in, and fear. So, whether you're talking about the thing on the left or the thing on the right, they are both equally empty of any snakeness from the side of the basis. Nonetheless, we can identify, that on the right-hand side as being a proper basis for a snake, for what we designate as snake. And we also can identify on the left side that being a proper basis for what we call a rope. But there's no ropeness on the basis for the left. There's no snakeness on the basis for the right. There's no snakeness on either of these, and there's no ropeness on either of these. Nothing exists from the side of the object. Everything is set up by thought, existing by thought. So then he says, tables are utterly devoid of the kind of table that I believe in. People exist, but people, just as I now conceive of them, have never and could never exist, even to the slightest degree. So this is what we are talking about in terms of this rope snake example, which people can find, again, very powerful, as His Holiness was talking about, to kind of get that point that it's similar. Here we have a rope, here we have a snake, in terms of our conventional parlance and what we call things, but they are both equally devoid of any snakeness from the side of that basis. We cannot find it on either one of them. And I think it is important that we take it to that degree and that we understand that this is the crux of it. It's not that, again, there's some level of falsity that that we can be okay with or whatever, that the falsity exists. And it's not just like the rope snake thing where we can say, oh, but in those cases, or like a reflection in a mirror, well, then it's understandable that that's not a real face. The idea is that this needs to be applied to everything. That when we think of this as I, that there's no I from the side of this stuff, that all of what is I is a mere thought, a mere designation, a mere imputation. So maybe this gets back to Aida's question too about, how do we arrive at that? We arrive at that through this repeated analysis and through trying to hold this awareness as we are dealing with things in our everyday life. That while things appear and they appear to have their own reality as books and as, bowls and as, computers and as all the variety of things that exist, the diversity of phenomena that are out there, they have no inherent existence from their own side. They don't set themselves up. Their identity comes from thought. So let me see if I had any further things that I wanted to share. Most of what I read was on future slides past the snake. I'm going to scroll forward, so sorry if I make you kind of dizzy by doing this, but okay. I read that and I read that. That was it then. Okay, let me see if there are any questions on that before I talk a little bit about karma and emptiness. I don't really have any slides for that because this is just something I want to talk about, but any questions on, I realize I kind of hammered these in a bit longer than what I maybe should have. They're only small passages in His Holiness's book, but nonetheless, or Guy Newland's book. But yeah, Barbara.
The examples that you were just giving about the rope and the snake, I feel that I understand both of them. And
Okay.
so I logically think that what I think is a snake, I understand is a composition of causes and conditions, parts, and our labeling.
Mm-hmm.
So why, and I'm trying to understand so I can get over it, my fear of snakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I logically understand what you're saying. I mean,
Right.
that makes sense to me. And I know that my fear is not a rational thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you alluded just a little bit ago that it's maybe karma comes into play.
Yeah. And again, what we're going to get into in talking about the karma as well as the two truths is that we're in no way ever trying to get to a place where we totally neglect conventional reality. I mean, because that's not the goal is not to be at a place where it's like, oh, none of this exists at all, again, because that would be that fault of nihilism. We fall into that. And to some degree, having a healthy fear of snakes, to recognize that, especially here in New Mexico, where if you do go out into parts of New Mexico, you can find rattlesnakes. Even when I lived in California, I haven't seen any in New Mexico because I don't maybe go out to the regions where they would be. But I've heard from people, one student up in Taos had a rattlesnake that came into her home and was underneath her bed, and she had to like deal with getting it into a huge plastic bucket and getting it out of her house, because when she called animal control, they weren't coming so quickly, and she really just wanted to get the thing out of her house. So, but there's nothing wrong with having sort of an understanding. Okay, conventionally, there's a merely imputed snake in my merely imputed room that has merely imputed fangs with a merely imputed poison that could merely imputedly bite me, and merely imputed, you know, there's, you can have that understanding, and you have a healthy respect for that, and say, okay, and maybe again, the fear wouldn't come in so much because you recognize that you need to do what you need to do to remove yourself from a situation where you could be harmed by that. Now, again, you're not going to hold on to that strong sense of an I that is, totally in, I don't know, maybe upset and angry and all sorts of emotions arising on the basis of that. And even the fear might not arise so much in terms of it. It's just, again, an understanding that things still play out in a conventional world that we have to be attentive to. So I'm maybe being a little loose with talking about it in terms of the snake. But when we talk about all the teachings that we've had prior to this, when we get to the emptiness teachings in this great scope of the Lamrim, we've already begun to understand karma, which again is a topic I'm going to talk about next, bringing it back around to that. But we've talked about how karma is this operative principle, law of cause and effect, that causes us to have various experiences, good rebirths, bad rebirths, whatever. I mean, we give these labels to them even. And we've talked about in the middle scope how we are caught being under the control of our karma delusions. We're caught up in the wheel of existence, samsara, going from life to life under the control of all these factors. And we get to these teachings on emptiness. It doesn't mean, oh, those teachings are totally, they're just conventional. They're just something that is like an artifice to get us to these teachings on emptiness. And when we come to understand emptiness, and that we have no fear or no respect for what happens with karma, we have no respect for what's happening in terms of the process by which we take rebirth and are in samsara. You respect all of that within the sphere of emptiness, because those are also dependent arisings. They are the conventional reality in which emptiness is the underpinning. Emptiness is what will help you to have a healthier relationship to everything that is conventional. So back to the snake, I don't think there's any problem with having a healthy regard for what can arise if someone sits down right next to a rattlesnake and lets them bite your flesh and inject poison into your system. This is something to be respected and to be acknowledged, and to say, okay, well, then I will do what I can to avoid that. And thank you very much. I'll have lots of love and compassion for the snake, and hope that the snake has good rebirths and is able to meet the Dharma and become enlightened and liberated, whatever. I mean, you can generate lots of different thoughts in the space of that, but you're simply not going to be grasping with the habitual fear that you would have, because you're not imbuing it with that level of reality to where all of the delusions can then arise. So it does mean, again, that we have a healthy regard for it. And again, maybe I haven't had the experience of emptiness yet, so maybe you would have no fear, might have no fear at all, but you would still have some understanding of what's going on. You don't lose all perspective as to what's going on in the world around you. You recognize that it's a merely imputed snake, that there's no real snake there, but you still don't, just put yourself in harm's way. You have that understanding within the sphere of emptiness, just like you're going to have an understanding of karma, an understanding of the 12 links of dependent arising, and how we go from life to life circling, and so on. So I don't know, does that help a little bit, Barbara?
It does. It does. I guess I'm trying to understand where a fear would come from. I have a friend who has a fear of bats. I am not one bit afraid of bats, and I've never had good, positive or negative experiences with snakes or bats. So it's not like, I guess I'm just wondering where fears and likes and kind of versions.
And that's the perfect segue into the karma topic, because
Okay.
why do we have particular predispositions towards particular objects, where some we have great aversion towards and some we have
Yep.
great affinity towards? Because we've karmically created that, you
Okay.
know.
Okay. Great.
So this is something to attribute to your karma, but not, again, feel like karma is a changing phenomenon. It's not something fixed, and we can always change those things so that we become less. Um, and if you get to the karma of a Buddha, I mean, they say that a Buddha has the experience of everything in kind of a uniform way of everything being sort of blissful. They don't really have this sort of variation and stuff that we go through of like, oh, really love to be around that. We really hate to be around that. We go
Hmm.
back and forth and all over the place. A Buddha's just going to be blissful wherever they're at. And a Buddha could probably be blissful sitting right next to a rattlesnake while the rattlesnake is biting their body and not even have any kind of change in their emotion at all. But that's, a pretty developed state. For us on the path, what we need to do again is to just recognize how these are karmic imprints that are causing things to appear in a particular way. Let me use the example. There is a question I know from Alejandra. Well,
Thank
actually,
you,
let me
Gen
take.
Don. Very
Oh,
helpful.
oh,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome, Barbara. I hope that it's helpful again, because this whole rope snake thing is really getting at just how do things actually exist. It's not
Mhm.
denying that they do exist, because they do still have a conventional existence that we need to uphold and be kind of okay with. So Alejandro says it must be oversimplification, but can we say that nothing, including ourselves, exists as we imagine it to in our minds, and that everything is shaped by an infinite number of causes and conditions? I mean, I think in general, imagine, I guess the word imagine is maybe not used as much, because imagine maybe starts sounding like I can imagine everything to be very different than it is, and that may be enough. But we do certainly imbue things through our false conceptions with qualities that they don't have. So in that way, we ourselves, other people, all phenomena, it doesn't exist in the way that it appears to our minds or that it's grasped to by our minds. So maybe I would change the word imagine, maybe to as we adhere to it, or based on its false appearance, even. Because again, we have both of those factors present. We have our grasping mind that is grasping at the appearance being that things exist on their own, inherently, separately. And we grasp at that, we adhere to that. Now, again, karmically too, I would say that let's get into the karma side of it when we get to that subject, but that may also be playing a role in this, because we don't adhere to things, we are adhering to things in terms of our own karmic appearance. And then it says everything is shaped by an infinite number of causes and conditions. Absolutely. I mean, everything that is produced is completely in flux. We got some amaryllis bulbs for the holidays, and so you watch this phenomenon of the bulb. Initially, you get it, and it maybe just has a little bit of green in the middle, right? And then you see the green begin to come up, and it begins to fatten a little bit to become the part that will be the flowers, and then it begins to grow the stem of it that will allow it to rise up above it. You see this whole phenomenon unfolding, and you recognize that it's just indicative of everything that's going on. I mean, certainly that's a more prominent change that's happening with regard to a phenomenon like a flower growing. But this is what's going on in our entire world, right? It's always in flux, and always everything kind of arising on the basis of causes and conditions, giving rise to further cause or effects from it acting as a cause or a condition. Because this is the whole thing, is that everything that we identify as a cause gives rise to an effect. Everything that is an effect becomes a cause for its future effect. I mean, this is um, evident in the world around us, right? And we just watch what's happening, and everything is constantly moving into something else. The skin that falls off of our hands becomes the dust that's under our beds, and so on. Nothing is sort of outside of the scope of the sphere of within this chain of causal process. Now, again, then we do have some phenomena that aren't cause. We talked about them briefly when we went through that levels of dependent arising. But nonetheless, our physical world is imbued with that. And this speaks to, again, its impermanence, but also speaks at a deeper level to its emptiness. Because if things were inherently existent, they would never change. Something would come into existence. Well, first of all, it would already be in existence. It would never be out of existence. It would never be capable of changing. These are the ramifications if inherent existence really existed. So it's very hard for us to get our heads around that idea sometimes, because we don't believe that, right? We go, oh no, things do change. I mean, I acknowledge everything in my world is kind of changing at a very micro level as well as a grosser level frequently. But nonetheless, we are adhering to something that is opposed to that, something that in the space of inherent existence, nothing could arise. Nothing could be created from causes and conditions. So causality is a key part of it, as you're pointing out, Alejandra, and this is what we get into really when we talk about karma and emptiness, which I don't have too much time to talk about. Let me introduce the analogy that's used, and then that's all we're going to have time for today. And I'll pick that up again at the beginning of next class, and I'll go through the two truths. Again, there's not too much to talk about in regard to the two truths, but it is an important teaching to go through. And then we'll talk a bit about the compassion teachings and that, and then we'll let things go for today. But this is the analogy. So say I don't have a glass here, but say you took a glass of water from our human realm and you put it on a table and you invited into the space that this glass of water is in two other beings. So you have a human, myself, seeing the glass, or yourself seeing the glass of water, or we'll call it a glass of fluid. Let's call it that, because this is the gist of the analogy. For us, it's a glass of water, but we put that glass of water from our world on the table, and this glass of fluid is going to be perceived by, let's say we invite in a god from the god realms. God realms have very different karma than we do. They have created through their good karma, it's a higher rebirth than what we have, an enjoyment of all things, so that things appear like ambrosia. This glass of fluid is going to appear to them as this nectar of the gods, this ambrosia. And then we have invited another being, and let's invite one from the lower realms. Let's invite one from what are called the pretas, the hungry ghosts. Most of you know this again from your other studies. These beings have created the karma to where when they approach something that is like water in our world, it appears as pus and blood for them. Really disgusting, right? And that's their own karmic obstacle they've created, so that when they have a more intimate experience of that substance, it appears as something really vile to them. So although they were thirsty originally and would kind of drawn towards that, that's why these hungry ghosts are called that. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they're always looking for something to satisfy, but they have blocks to getting that. And one of the blocks is that when they approach these substances, they appear as pus and blood. Okay, so we have this glass of fluid. For us, it's water. For the gods, it's nectar. For the hungry ghosts, it's pus and blood. What is it really? Okay, it's karmically influenced as to what the beings have as an experience of that. There's nothing from the side of the base that indicates what it is. It's not like we say, oh, our water appears as pus and blood over here and nectar over there. No, it appears as water to you, but there's nothing inherently there from the side of that fluid that makes it into any of those three. But nonetheless, an experience of those would be occurring by virtue of the beings who have that particular karma. As I said, this isn't that hard to see if we actually look at once more what we were talking about, having particular karmic dispositions to see something as pleasant and delightful versus something that brings about fear or aversion, like the snake thing that Barbara was talking about, right? But look at the music analogy. It's a similar thing, right? I have a predisposition to like a particular type of music and to have that. And maybe some of it's conditioning too. My father, I think all the music my father played, I don't like. Maybe that was part of the conditioning. He liked country Western music and, really twangy kind of country Western music that, isn't something like our modern country Western that's a little more, I don't know, rock or pop influenced or something. But, so we have kind of our own predispositions that can be influenced by certain factors. It's not to say that that isn't also part of our karma, but we have a way of viewing the world to see it in particular ways, that we like this, we don't like that. We are attached to this, we have aversion towards that. These are all karmic conditionings. So that glass of fluid doesn't have anything from its own side. That's why it is empty of any inherent nature. And the karma is sort of the movie that each of us is projecting onto that experience of that glass of fluid. The movie of the gods is a very blissful and delightful one. The movie of the hungry ghost is a painful and awful one. The movie of a human being with that glass of liquid being water is probably a pretty neutral one. I mean, I don't get too excited. Maybe if I'm really hot in the summer and I see a nice glass of water, I get pretty excited about it, but a glass of water doesn't really have a real profound experience for me. It's not something I'm greatly attached to nor averse to. It's just kind of a neutral experience. So we have a pleasant, a neutral, and an unpleasant experience going on at the same time. What's really there, again, is there's nothing from the side of the object. It's karmically determined. Karma feeds into all of this and gives us the appearances of things. This is why in the deepest teachings of Tantra, which you'll go into in the new year in the Discovering Buddhism course, this is all changeable. We can actually have a totally different experience of the world we live in by purifying our own minds and our own karma. So karma is totally upheld within emptiness. It's not something divorced from it, that once we understand emptiness, we just pitch karma to the side. Karma is what informs our experiences of things within the sphere of emptiness, because this is causes and conditions at the level of experience. That's what we mean by karma. So that's about all I'm going to say for today. And maybe you can noodle over that 3 different beings in the glass of fluid over the next week. The meditation for this week, I'm just going to put it on the screen very quickly. It's one of the shortest meditations in Discovering Buddhism, I think. It's just this meditation cultivating awareness of emptiness. And as you can see, this is the body of the meditation. That's it. It's over. It's just like about 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs. It just has to do with this idea of beginning to see things as empty and therefore kind of this illusory appearance, that all appearances aren't factual in the way that they are appearing to us. They don't exist in that reality. And just kind of work with this, cultivating this awareness on the cushion with this meditation, as well as up off the cushion. Again, we're never denying that there's sort of this appearance still is valid at some conventional level. We're just getting at that it doesn't have the validity at the way that it appears to exist inherently from its own side. So don't think that you can walk in front of a car and, do whatever. I mean, this isn't the right assumption from learning about emptiness, that none of this is functional. It's all functional within the sphere of emptiness. Merely imputed things function just fine. So we're going to, wrap things up. I'm hoping, even with what I still have to cover from today, because it's mostly just on the 2 truths, I'll talk a little bit more about karma and emptiness, maybe give you a few quotes from Rinpoche on this, because Lama Zopa really likes talking about this whole subject, emptiness in particular, but also how karma is related to this. And then we will go on to the 2 truths, and we'll talk a bit about how this informs our compassion and how we can bring this to life in terms of our everyday awareness, which we've already talked about to some degree today. But so thank you all for your questions and everything today, and for partaking of this. Let's do our dedication prayers. So if Anil, if you could put those on the screen. Again, the first dedication prayer that, or actually maybe these are the prayers for from Shantideva. So yes, as we're going to recite these prayers from Shantideva, these verses from his 10th chapter where he's dedicating, we can bring to mind, first of all the beings that we are holding in our hearts that we want to make sure benefit from what we've done here today, but extend this out to all beings, as it says here, wanting all of them to receive benefit from what we've done. And then also try to bring an awareness of emptiness. Although we are dedicating, we ourselves are empty of inherent existence. We're illusory. We don't exist in the way we appear. The same for the beings we're dedicating for, the same for the act of dedicating, the same for all the results that we want these beings to experience. They all lack inherent existence and are illusory. They don't exist in the way that they appear. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Then we'll just do a quick dedication for these three teachers in our tradition, extending this out for the good health and long lives of all spiritual guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally for Osohita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Thank you, Anil, for your help with that and for your hosting today. By the way, when you were talking, Barbara, about people who have different fears, I have a friend in San Francisco who fears moths, moths that fly at flames and stuff. I mean, she always wondered where that karma came from. I mean, maybe she was like something that moths preyed upon or whatever, who knows? So we never know kind of the karma of why we have particular reactions to certain things. And I have no problem, like if a moth gets in the house in the summer, remember that time of year, it's summer when all the moths are coming through your screen door and everything. I just have no problem kind of picking them up and taking them outside gently, letting them kind of be on their way. But she was terrified of moths. So anyway, we all have our own thing. So anyway, thank you all for joining today. I hope this was a good class to kind of pursue a few of these kind of ideas around this. We didn't go into so much the analyses and what have you, but kind of how we bring that to life by thinking about things as illusory, as depending completely upon thought. So I hope it's of some benefit. And I will see you all perhaps during the week, but next Saturday again is our final class. It's actually the final class before the holiday break as well. It'll be the last class at TNL. Other than Venerable Rabina, I think, is teaching on Christmas Day. She's doing a special little teaching. But so anyway, I will hopefully see you next week, if not before. Stay safe, be well.